Welcome to Helpful Hints for Chapter 7, 1033 Lab Project. You've been given 3 different formulas here. Now really you only have 2. I'll explain that in a second, but let's talk about some of those formulas. First of all, you have your midpoint formula, which is right here. And for your midpoint formula, you're going to be finding what's in the middle. So this is important to us. What we're going to do, the way that we're going to find that, is we're going to average our x's, add them up and divide by 2. We're going to average our y's. And when we do that, we'll find what's in the middle. Now, something else that we want to use is the Pythagorean theorem. And this Pythagorean theorem has a base down here. It has a height. And if I know the lengths of those two, I can square the base and I can add the sum of the square of the height. And that will give me the square of the hypotenuse, and I can find c, which is the length of that hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is the longest side, and it's opposite the right angle. This only works with right angles. So, now, that was a good use in geometry, but in order to apply that to algebra, because in algebra we're very concerned with finding the distance between those 2 points, but what we're really doing is we're finding how long that leg of that triangle would be and how long that one would be, the height of that triangle, and then we can apply the Pythagorean theorem. So this x2 minus x1 is really the length if I counted spaces between x2 and x1, and then this is how long the height would be of that triangle, and if I can find those two, I can apply it to the distance formula. So they're really the same formula, just with slightly different applications. Now the first thing that we're asked to do is to take these two, and we're going to try to find the meeting point between them. The meeting point will be where they meet in the middle. You're going to use your midpoint formula to find out what happens in here. Find out where it is that they meet in the middle. You're going to average your x's and average your y's. Now the second thing that you're supposed to do is find the distance. So here's your distance. You need to find the distance as represented in the nearest hundredth of a grid unit between those two. In order to do that, you're going to need to find out what your x2 minus x1 is, and you're going to need to find out what your y2 minus y1 is, and that will give you the rest that you need in order to apply the distance formula, which is our algebraic use of the Pythagorean theorem. Last but not least, the distance is measured in grid units, so you're going to change that to miles, and we're going to use this piece of information here. 1 grid unit is equal to 500 miles. So you're going to need to multiply the number of grid units you estimated from the previous problem to the nearest hundredth times 500 in order to find a good approximate distance in miles. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to cut down a tree. Now, they give you some information. For this one, they tell you that the trunk is 36 feet tall. So here's your trunk, it's 36. And then and you're going to attach the wire 15 feet away from the base. So the thing that we need to find, how long must your wire be? That would be this right here. Identify what you already know about the Pythagorean theorem. Now, what assumption about the tree in the ground do we need to make? The important thing here is we talked about the Pythagorean theorem and why it only works for a special kind of triangle. And why does this represent that special kind of triangle? How do you know? The next thing is you need to measure the depth of a large lake. And since the sonar equipment is very expensive, you decide to use your friend's boat. So we have a couple of measurements here. We know that the GPS tells us that the boat has moved 82 feet. We also know that the boat has an anchor with a 90-foot line. So here's my anchor right here, and this. So there's the anchor. Now in this case we've been given something else. We've not been given the legs of the triangle and find the hypotenuse, but we've in fact been given the hypotenuse. Also, the GPS tells us we move this far over, which is going to be the same distance as down here. The question you are asked is what's the depth? So you will not be solving for C or solving for D in this case. Just C because we're using Pythagorean theorem. But you'll be solving for the height. The last problem that you have is talking about a foundation. And you know the diagonal, and you know how long the base is, and you know the height is. And given all of these things, we can represent this triangle right here as a right triangle. And if the Pythagorean theorem works for that part, then we know that it is square. In other words, the vertices all have to be 90 degrees.